By the end of this video, you will know why some words in the Greek New Testament have two accents, why most of the times you meet the present tense of the verb eīmī that it lacks accents, and what's happened to those accents. Hi, Rob McIver here. Let's talk about the enclitic present tense of the verb eīmī. Hey, wait a minute, Rob. You need to tell us what is an enclitic word. Well, an enclitic word is one that tries to throw its accent on the previous word. Now, most of the times you see the verbs eīmī, estin, eisen in the New Testament, they are lacking an accent. And you may think that, in fact, those verbs don't have an accent. So I thought it would be good to start with the places where eīmī cannot throw its accent on the previous word. Here are some examples of where the accent stays on eīmī because the previous word cannot accept an accent. For example, uk eīmī, I am not. It's found in John 1:21 and many other places, by the way, and it's at the end of a sentence. So the accent remains on eīmī, it's on the last syllable, and it remains acute because it is the end of a sentence. You will probably remember that acute accents on the last syllable usually go grave if there's a following word, and that's true of eīmī as well. For example, uk eīmī in John 1:20 and verse 27 and elsewhere, which means I am not still, is found in the middle of the sentence, and you'll see that the accent has gone grave. Hoti uk eisen, because they are not. Here, eisen is following uk, and again, uk will not receive an accent. So it remains on eisen and it remains on the last syllable. Now, esten has some interesting features. So, uk esten, in that form, in the middle of a sentence, you will find the accent on the first syllable. And there's an interesting sentence there, isn't there? Uk esten theos nekron. He is not God of the dead. That's found in Mark 12:27. And it's in the middle of a sentence. At the end of the sentence, the accent moves to the last syllable. Wow, don't ask me why. We have Sophia esten is wisdom. It's an acute accent on the last syllable. We have en oiko esten, which is the same kind of construction. It's actually idiomatic, means Jesus was at home. In house is literally. And again, the acute accent remains acute because it's the last word in a sentence. And mega esten is great. Now, that's not the end of the sentence, but it's just before a semicolon, which almost is the same, isn't it? In all these examples, you will see that the present tense of eīmī has retained its accent because it cannot go back on the previous word. And perhaps by now you'll believe me that eīmī, esten and eisen do have accents. Now let's see some examples where they throw these accents on the previous word. And these are kind of fun because normally a Greek word only has one accent, but because eisen has thrown the accent back on the previous word, and the previous word has got enough syllables to accommodate it, we now have words that have more than one accent. For example, protas eīmī ego. I am first. You'll see that eīmī has thrown its accent back on protos, which has both a circumflex accent on the omega and an acute accent on the final syllable, os, and you'll notice it's remained acute. We have houtos esten, this man is, and again the accent has been thrown back and we have a two-syllable word with two accents. Torta esten, these things are, again, a two-syllable word with two accents because esten has thrown its accent back on the last syllable of torta. Ekainos esten, that man. Again, the accent's been thrown back onto the last syllable of ekainos. Houtos ho thanatos ho deuteros esten. This is the second death. We have the accent of esten being thrown back on deuteros. So it has an accent on the upsilon and an accent on the omicron. And you'll notice that when the accent is thrown backwards, it remains acute usually. And I thought you'd like the last one, even though it's a word that you're highly unlikely to know. It just looks wonderful. Polnus splanknos estin. He is compassionate. And you might think, wow, look at the accent way back on that upsilon. It seems too far from the end of the word, but no, there are only 3 syllables there and 3 vowels. So it's the third vowel back, polu, and then the accent from estin goes back to the last syllable. So those are all examples where we can see clearly how the accent has been thrown back on the previous word. Now, sometimes what happens is the previous word already has an accent, a grave accent on the last syllable, and throwing the accent back from eīmī or estin or eisin turns that grave accent into an acute accent. So, for example, ego, now ego, which means I, usually has a grave accent when it's found in the New Testament because an acute accent on the last syllable turns grave if there's a following word. That's the general rule, and we can see it happening in John 14:3 there, eīmī ego, which is in reverse, really, isn't it? So the accent is grave. When it's in the form ego eīmī, you will see that the accent of eīmī, in being thrown back on the previous word, has turned the grave accent into an acute accent. We see a similar thing with theoi ester, you are gods. So the accent of Esther has turned the grave accent on the oi of theoi to an acute accent. We see a similar thing with hoioi Esther, you are sons, aner estin, man is. So those words have an accent on their last syllable. It should usually be grave, there's another word following it, but the present tense of eīmī throws the accent back on the previous word and turns that grave accent into an acute accent. And sometimes the accent is thrown back on an already existing accent. For example, tone kakon estin is of evil, and the accent of estin there has gone back into the last syllable, which already has a circumflex accent, so nothing is going to change there. And we have Naos Theou Esmin, we are the temple of God. And again, the accent of Esmin has been thrown back on Theou, which already has a circumflex accent, so no change follows. I thought you might be interested in other words in the Greek New Testament that are enclitic. And here's a list here taken from my book, Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier. So we already know that the present indicative active of eīmī, except for the second person singular, is enclitic. We've just been looking at examples. Now, the oblique cases of the first and second person pronoun are also enclitic. All right, let's explain that a bit. So these are the words me, mu, moi. So that is me, my, to me, and setsu, soi, you, yours, to you. They are all enclitic. And in my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier, you'll find a whole section devoted to those words in chapter 20. All cases of the indefinite pronoun tis and ti are enclitic. And again, I explain what that means in chapter 20 of my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier. And here are a list of words that occur less frequently in the New Testament. The emphatic particles, ja and t, and finally the present indicative active of eīmī, which in my book is found in vocabulary 38. So let's sum it up, shall we? The present indicative active of the verb eīmī is enclitic, well, except for the second person singular. What this means is that where possible, the accent on the present tense of eīmī is thrown back on the previous words. Sometimes this is not possible, so the accent remains. Sometimes this means that the previous word gets 2 accents. Sometimes it means that the grave accent on the last syllable of a previous word becomes an acute accent. And sometimes, well, we can't really see where it's gone because the previous word has a circumflex accent, for example. This is one of several videos that I have made on accents in the New Testament. You can most easily find these videos by subscribing to my YouTube channel, NT Greek Made Easier, or by following me on x.com at Rob McIver 2024. And hey, if you found this video useful, why don't you either click on the like button or the heart below. Many thanks.